The council chamber had never been this quiet. Ambassador Vera of the Thessian Collective pressed her four-fingered hand flat against the observation glass and watched the human delegation below. 43 representatives from Earth, seated in perfect silence around the circular table. No movement.
No whispered conversations. No nervous gestures.
Just stillness so complete it made the air feel wrong. Behind her, High Councillor Drex spoke in a voice barely above a breath. How long? 11 minutes, said the monitor technician, his blue skin pale with something that wasn't quite fear but was close enough. They haven't moved in 11 minutes. Drex touched the alert panel. His finger hovered. Protocol Omega requires 17 minutes of documented silence before. I know what protocol requires. Vera didn't turn from the glass. I'm asking you to tell me what your instincts say. The technician said nothing. That was answer enough. Below, the human called Ambassador Marcus Chen sat at the head of the table. His hands rested flat on the surface. His eyes were open, fixed on the center of the table where the failed treaty proposal lay scattered like shed skin. 6 months of negotiation. 3 dead translators. 1 destroyed shuttle that they still hadn't explained. And, now this silence. Vera had studied humans for 19 years. She had read every file, attended every seminar, reviewed every incident report from the 12 species who had encountered them before formal contact. She knew their biology, their history, their strange compulsion to fight things larger than themselves. She knew they cried at music and laughed at pain and kept photographs of people already dead. She did not know what this silence meant. That was the problem. Every species the Council had catalogued followed predictable emotional architecture. When Dravani went quiet, they were grieving. When Solon fell silent, they were calculating. When Kreth stopped speaking, a territorial claim was imminent. Each silence had a shape, a texture, a translation. Human silence had no translation on record. The first time the Council had encountered it was 40 years ago, before Vera's appointment, when the mining dispute on Callus 4 had collapsed. The human negotiators had gone quiet for 22 minutes. When they stood up, they had already decided to reroute 3 of their cargo lanes, absorb a financial loss that nearly bankrupted 2 of their colonies, and draft a secondary proposal that eventually became the framework for all current trade agreements. No one had seen it coming. The silence had looked like defeat and turned out to be architecture. The second time was worse. The Rhenish incident. A human research vessel seized by Rhenish border patrols on disputed grounds. The human diplomatic team had gone silent for 9 minutes during emergency talks. When the silence broke, they had already identified 17 leverage points in Rhenish treaty obligations and used 6 of them simultaneously within 48 hours. The Rhenish had released the vessel, paid reparations, and never publicly explained why. The silence had looked like shock. It had been a weapon being loaded. Vera pressed her hand harder against the glass. Below, Chen's eyes moved. Just slightly. To his left, then, back to center. Another human, a woman named Dr. Solus, shifted her weight by a fraction. Their hands remained still. Their faces gave nothing. Ambassador. The technician's voice cracked. 13 minutes. The door behind Vera opened. She didn't need to look to know who had entered. The sound of the footsteps was too measured, too precise, too utterly unhurried. Only one person in the entire council complex moved like that. Queen Regent Myra of the Ashanti moved to Vera's side and looked down through the glass. She was ancient by any species standard, her silver skin marked with the administrative patterns of 6 decades of rule, her 4 eyes each tracking a different section of the room below. She had overseen first contact with 11 species. She had authorized the Protocol Omega alert exactly once in her reign. She said nothing for a long moment. Then, do you know why we sound the special alert when humans go quiet? Vera kept her voice steady. The files say unpredictability. The files are incomplete. Myra clasped her hands behind her back, a gesture Vera had learned meant she was about to say something she had never said aloud before. We sound the alert because silence is the only moment when humans are faster than us. Faster. Every other species thinks out loud. They argue, they signal, they negotiate in real time. We can track the reasoning. We can respond as it develops. Myra's eyes didn't move from the humans below. Humans compress it. All of it. Every calculation, every option, every consequence. They run it internally, in silence, and, by the time they speak again, they are not proposing. They are informing. 14 minutes. Chen's hands moved. Not dramatically. Not a sudden gesture. Just a slight repositioning, fingers spreading then, settling, the way a person arranges themselves before they lift something heavy. Vera's breath stopped. Sound the alert, Myra said quietly. Drex moved to the panel. Below, Marcus Chen lifted his head and looked directly up at the observation glass as though he had known they were there the entire time. He smiled. It was the kind of smile that meant the silence was already over. The decision had already been made. Whatever came next had already been set in motion 11 minutes ago, in the quiet, when no one could see it being built. The alert sounded through the station like a held breath finally, released. Chen opened his mouth to speak. The words that came out of Chen's mouth were not what anyone expected. We accept the revised terms. Drex froze with his hand still on the alert panel. The technician screen showed 17 different council departments responding to the Omega signal, emergency liaisons pulling up conflict protocols, security teams moving into position at every corridor junction, 3 different admirals being woken from sleep cycles across the station. All of it activated. All of it already unnecessary. Vera stared through the glass. That's it. That's it, Myra said. Her voice carried no relief. That was the part that made Vera's secondary heart skip a beat. Below, the human delegation was already gathering documents, already organizing their materials with the efficient, quiet movements of people who had finished one task and were mentally 3 steps into the next. Dr. Solis was pulling up something on her personal data slate. A younger delegate in the back row was writing. Not typing. Writing, with a physical instrument on actual paper, which humans apparently still used when they wanted something that couldn't be remotely accessed or intercepted. They accepted terms we hadn't finalized, Vera said slowly. The revision index wasn't transmitted until, she checked the station log, 12 minutes ago. Correct, Myra said. They've been silent for 14 minutes. Correct. Vera turned to look at the Queen Regent directly. They accepted terms before we'd finished writing them. Myra's expression didn't change. They accepted terms we were going to write. There is a difference. A meaningful one. She finally moved away from the observation glass, her steps unhurried as ever, and settled into the high-backed chair at the room's edge that was kept for her use and no one else's. Seat, Ambassador. I'm going to tell you something that isn't in any file. Vera Saturday. Drex stayed at the panel but lowered his hand. The alert was still sounding through the station. Neither of them moved to cancel it yet. 31 years ago, Myra began. Before you held this post, before the formal frameworks existed, the Council had a different opinion of humans. We considered them a minor species. Localized conflict potential, moderate expansion trajectory, no significant military capacity by our metrics. We gave them a contact team of 14 and a second-hand diplomatic shuttle. She paused. The contact team came back in 9. The shuttle came back in pieces. The Vargan incident, Vera said. Every diplomat knew the outline. The Vargan were not careful, Myra said. They intercepted the shuttle, took the team, planned to use them as currency in a territorial dispute with us. Standard practice for a species that treats sentient life as a negotiable resource. They had done it before with 3 other young species. Her 4 eyes settled on Vera. They were not prepared for what humans did in captivity. The files say the team was recovered. The files say the team was recovered. The files do not say how. Myra let that sit in the air. The human team was 9 individuals. They were held for 16 days in a Vargan processing station rated to contain beings 4 times their physical capacity. The station had 600 Vargan personnel, automated defense grids, a ship killer array in high orbit. A pause. On the 16th day, the 9 humans left the station. The 600 Vargan did not follow them. Vera said nothing. The Council received a transmission from the human team leader, Myra continued. It said 3 things. First, that all 9 team members were unharmed. Second, that the Vargan would require significant time to rebuild their command structure and recommended the Council send a diplomatic contact before they stabilized. Third, that the humans would appreciate a working shuttle for the return trip. The alert was still sounding. Somewhere down the corridor, Boots moved in formation. Security teams responding to protocol. Vera should cancel the alert. She didn't. What did the council do? She asked. We sent the shuttle. And we rewrote our classification of humans from minor species to Category 7. The highest category we had. Myra folded her hands. The Vargan were Category 5 at the time. Vera looked back through the glass. Below, the human delegation was standing now, preparing to file out. Chen was still at the head of the table, speaking quietly with two of his people. Whatever he was saying, he wasn't hurrying it. He had the unhurried manner of someone who had already ensured the outcome and was simply handling the details. The silence, Vera said. It wasn't just the Callus 4 negotiation. The Renish incident. They always go quiet before something significant shifts. Every time, Myra confirmed. We analyzed it over 20 years. The silence occurs when they are performing what their own psychologists call high-stakes rapid integration. They take every variable, every threat, every resource, every possible sequence of consequences, and they compress it into a cognitive window that their species evolved to run in extreme danger scenarios. She met Vera's eyes. It is not a thinking pause, Ambassador. It is a targeting system. The door opened. A young council aide appeared, breathing fast, clearly having run from somewhere. Queen Regent, the Omega alert. Should we stand down? The humans have indicated acceptance. There's no conflict. Keep it active, Myra said without looking at him. Until the human delegation has cleared the station and their vessels are in open transit. The aide blinked. That's not standard protocol for a, it is now. Her tone left no room. The aide disappeared. Vera watched Chen through the glass. He was at the door now. He paused with one hand on the frame, and, without looking up, without any visible reason to do so, he tilted his head very slightly toward the observation glass. Acknowledging it. Acknowledging her. Then, he was gone. What did they actually decide in those 14 minutes? Vera asked. The accepted terms are only a part of it. What's the rest? Myra was quiet for a moment. That, she said, is precisely why the alert stays on. The human vessels departed exactly on schedule, which was the first thing that worried the senior analysts. Human schedules were usually approximate, adjusted for variables, padded on both ends with flexibility windows. An exact departure meant the schedule had been locked before the meeting concluded, possibly before it began. Vera stood in the command center now, watching the three human ships pull away from the docking arms on the main display. Standard configuration. 2 diplomatic transports flanking a slightly larger vessel that carried the delegation and whatever equipment they'd brought with them. Nothing unusual in the sensor readings. Power signatures normal. Trajectory filed correctly. She kept watching. They filed a route to Helix Station, the navigation monitor reported. 12-hour transit at standard cruise. Cross-reference with the treaty zones, Vera said. A pause. The filed route passes through the outer Cassian corridor. Vera turned. That's 40 minutes out of direct transit. Yes, Ambassador. The outer Cassian corridor wasn't restricted. It wasn't particularly notable in any council database. But, 3 weeks ago, a long-range sensor array had logged anomalous readings in that corridor. The report had been flagged as low priority. Equipment malfunction, most likely. Vera had seen the summary and moved on. She pulled it up now. The readings weren't equipment malfunction. They were consistent with a cloak structure. Small, stationary, sitting in the corridor's sensor shadow exactly where a species that knew what it was doing would place something it didn't want casually observed. Get me the full sensor log from 3 weeks ago, she said. And cross-reference it with any human-registered vessels that transited this region in the past 6 months. The technician worked. The room was quiet in the way rooms got when everyone understood the weight of what was being checked. 7 transits, he said finally. All logged as standard scientific survey runs. All legally registered. Were any of them flagged for secondary inspection? No. Vera looked at the display. The 3 human ships moved smoothly through space, exactly on their filed route, burning no more power than a standard cruise required. Chen was on one of those ships. He was probably eating something, or reviewing documents, or doing whatever humans did in transit that wasn't preparing for the thing they had already prepared for. She pressed the Queen Regent. You should see the Cassian corridor data. A moment later, Myra's voice came back calm as still water. I've seen it. How long? Since yesterday. Vera absorbed that. You knew they were already in position before the meeting. I suspected. A pause. It changed nothing about the negotiation. Whatever they've placed in the Cassian corridor, it isn't a weapon aimed at us. The positioning is wrong for aggression. It's positioned to observe the Helix approach lane. Vera pulled up the approach lane on the display. The Helix corridor was used by 7 species. 3 of them were currently in active disputes with human commercial interests. 2 were members of the Rhenish coalition. One of them had a Dreadnought-class vessel docked at Helix Station right now, undergoing what was officially logged as routine maintenance. They're not here to negotiate with us, Vera said slowly. They were never primarily here to negotiate with us. No, Myra agreed. The treaty revision was real. The terms are fair and we will ratify them. But the meeting's actual purpose was to give them legitimate docking access to this station, put their ships in the region under diplomatic flag, and establish a legal presence in the corridor while the Council's attention was on the negotiation. A brief pause. The silence wasn't about our terms, Ambassador. They settled our terms in the first 4 minutes. What were they calculating for the other 10? I believe they were finalizing the timing on whatever they've placed in the Cassian corridor. Myra's voice stayed steady. I believe something is about to happen at Helix Station. And I believe by the time it does, the human vessels will be exactly positioned to respond to it, have been there for 3 weeks in preparation for it, and will have done nothing technically outside the boundaries of any treaty we share. The room was very quiet. On the display, the human ships continued their smooth transit. Proper speed. Proper course. Every instrument reading perfectly normal. Vera thought about Chen tilting his head at the observation glass. Not a greeting. An acknowledgement. He had known she was watching, known she was analyzing, known that by the time she worked backward through the logic of what they'd done, the pieces would be already in motion. Do we intervene? She asked. In what? Myra said. They've broken no law.
Violated no treaty.
Positioned no weapon against Council interests. Whatever happens at Helix, we will not see it coming until it's already done. A pause that carried the weight of 31 years of revised threat assessments and rewritten classification protocols. And, after it's done, we will send them a working shuttle. Because that is what a wise species does when it realizes that the most dangerous moment with humans is not when they allowed. On the display, the human ships vanished into the Cassian corridor, right on schedule, exactly where they'd always planned to be. It's when they've been quiet, Vera finished. The Omega alert was still sounding through the station. No one moved to cancel it. Helix Station's morning rotation was halfway through its cycle when the Dreadnought's maintenance logs stopped transmitting. Not an alarm. Not a distress signal. Just a quiet cessation, the way a conversation ends when one party simply stops responding. The station's automated systems flagged it as a minor anomaly, routed it to a junior technician's queue, assigned it a low-priority status. The Dreadnought was large and old and had been known to have intermittent communication irregularities. The Rhenish crew maintained their own equipment on their own schedule and had never welcomed Council inspection. In the Cassian corridor, 7 minutes away at combat speed, the humans watched. Commander Sarah Vance sat in the monitoring station aboard the survey vessel Patience and tracked 17 feeds simultaneously on a display array that curved around her in a half-circle. She had been watching the Dreadnought for 3 weeks. She knew its maintenance schedule better than its own engineers. She knew which shifts changed at what hour and how long the handoff protocols took. She knew that at the end of this specific rotation, for a window of approximately 22 minutes, the Dreadnought's secondary weapons grid would be partially offline for recalibration. The window had opened 4 minutes ago. Transmission status? She asked. Dark, said her signals officer. As expected. Their crew. Full complement aboard. No external communications logged in the past 6 hours outside of routine station traffic. Vance leaned forward. On the feed from the concealed sensor array she'd placed in the corridor 3 weeks ago, legally, under survey charter, in compliance with every applicable regulation, she watched the Dreadnought's power signature shift. Almost imperceptibly. But she'd been watching long enough to know what imperceptible meant on that ship. They're spooling, she said. Confirmed. Her weapons officer, a quiet man named Okafor who spoke rarely and, precisely, looked up from his station. Drive charge consistent with combat departure, not standard navigation. Where's the vector? Okafor was already working it. Based on the drive axis and current helix positioning, a pause. The human commercial depot. Outer Ring, Section 4. The depot held 6 months of supply reserves for the human colonies in the sector. It also held 47 civilian dockworkers, a rotating crew of 12, and a small administrative office staffed by people whose entire job was filling out customs forms and arguing with freight companies. Vance stood. Not quickly. Not with panic. She stood the way she always stood, with the unhurried precision of someone who had already run every relevant calculation and simply needed to move to the next stage. Send the package, she said. Her communications officer looked up. Authentication. Chen's code. He cleared it before departure. The package was not a weapon. It was a data file. Specifically, it was 22 months of sensor logs, maintenance records, encrypted internal Rhenish communications that had been obtained through 7 different intelligence channels and 3 separate legal frameworks, and a formal request from the human delegation, filed under Council Emergency Protocol, for immediate sanctions review of the Rhenish dreadnought currently aboard Helix Station. It was transmitted simultaneously to the Council Emergency Chamber, the Helix Station Security Command, the 8 other species currently holding council seats, and for independent legal review bodies whose endorsement would be needed for any sanctions proceeding. The transmission took 4 seconds. In the emergency chamber aboard the council station, Vera watched it arrive. She had been watching for it. Not because she had known the specifics, but because Myra had been right about the timing, and the timing had led her here, to this chair, to this moment, waiting for the thing that had already been built in the silence. The data file was comprehensive. It was devastating. It outlined a pattern of Rhenish military movements that constituted a clear violation of the non-aggression framework, documented covert weapons transfers that had been conducted under the cover of the maintenance docking, and provided the sensor confirmation that the dreadnought was currently spooling for an unauthorized departure vector that would take it directly to a civilian installation. The Council had 17 minutes to act before the weapons grid completed recalibration. Myra entered the emergency chamber 3 minutes after the file arrived. She had clearly been awake. She looked like someone who had expected to be awake at exactly this hour. Authorize the interdiction order, she said.
No preamble.
No review of the file she'd certainly already seen. Full council sanctions, immediate enforcement. Get a council vessel into the Helix approach lane before that grid comes back online. Drex moved to execute. That will be a significant confrontation. The Rhenish will protest. They'll protest from dock, Myra said, where they'll stay until the review is complete. She moved to the center of the chamber and looked at the operational display. And transmit a formal acknowledgement to Ambassador Chen. Thank him for the intelligence work. How do we explain having it? Drex asked. Myra was quiet for a moment. We don't explain it, she said. We use it. There will be time for explanations after the 47 people in Section 4 of the Outer Ring go home safely. The interdiction order went out. At Helix Station, the Council enforcement vessel that had been on quiet standby for 2 days, positioned there 3 weeks ago at a Queen Regent's private request, without formal documentation, without explanation to the crew beyond be ready, moved to block the dreadnought's departure lane with 11 minutes to spare. In the Cassian corridor, Vance watched it happen on her sensor feeds and felt the specific satisfaction of a plan that had been built in silence arriving exactly on schedule. She opened the channel to Chen's vessel. Package delivered. His voice came back with the slight warmth of someone deeply tired who was choosing not to show it. Confirmed. How long did they have the window? We closed it with 11 minutes left. A pause. Good. That's enough margin. Enough for what? Another pause, shorter this time. To make sure they know we could have let it happen. That's the part they'll remember. Not that we stopped it. That we had the capability to stop it and chose to use it for the right reason. Vance thought about that for a long moment as the dreadnought's power signatures dropped back to idle, as the Rhenish captain aboard made whatever calculations were available to someone who had been outmaneuvered 3 weeks before they knew the game had started. Is that why you took the long route through the corridor? She asked. We always take the long route, Chen said. It's how you see the things that matter. The channel closed. In the council emergency chamber, Myra watched the operational display settle into a controlled resolution. No shots fired.
No casualties.
47 people in the outer ring going about their shift rotation without knowing how close the morning had come to being something else entirely. She looked at Vera. Now you know why we sound the alert. Vera was looking at the display, at the clean lines of an interdiction that had been planned and executed with no council knowledge until it arrived fully formed, documented, and legally irrefutable. It's not about danger, Vera said quietly. It's about not knowing what they're building. You can track a species that thinks out loud, Myra said. You can respond to argument, match signals, counter proposals. The shape of the conflict is visible. She looked at the display where the dreadnought sat silent and contained. But a species that can carry an entire wargame internally, completed in silence, and hand you the outcome of something they finished building before you knew there was a structure being raised. She paused. The alert isn't a warning about them. It's a reminder to us to pay attention to what we can't see. The Omega alert had been sounding for 2 hours. Myra finally raised her hand and made the gesture that would silence it. It cut off mid-tone, leaving the chamber in a quiet that felt, in the aftermath, like a different kind of silence entirely. Not threatening, not concealing, just the ordinary quiet of a moment that had passed its crisis and was settling into history. On the operational display, 3 human ships continued their transit toward Helix Station, right on schedule, everything exactly as filed. Vera watched them and thought about what had been built in 11 minutes of stillness around a circular table, in a room full of scattered treaty proposals, with 43 humans who hadn't moved. She thought about Chen's smile. Not the smile of someone who had won. The smile of someone who had already known how it would end, and was simply waiting, with characteristic patience, for the rest of the universe to catch up. She pulled up the Council's official contact classification system. Category 7 sat at the top of the scale, above every species currently registered, a category that had been created specifically and never duplicated. Below it, she found the original note appended by the analyst who had first proposed the reclassification 31 years ago. A single line. They are quietest when they are most certain. She read it twice. Then, she closed the file, turned back to the display, and watched the human ships dock at Helix Station with the particular care of someone who was going to be paying very close attention to silence for the rest of her career.